I'm sorry, I just want to go.
Hello?
I'm sorry, I just want to see my family. I want to see my family.
It was a desperate, fearful, urgent voice. But most of the people who heard it had no idea that they were so close to a chance to change everything. January 17, 2008, Northport, Florida, USA. It was an unusually hot and humid winter morning. At about 6:14 p.m. that afternoon, the 911 operator received a call from a woman sobbing and pleading for help. The voice, weak but determined, belonged to Denise Amber Lee, a 21-year-old mother of 2 young boys. And what no one knew was, the people who heard that cry were so close to their only chance to save her. But they let it pass. Forever. Denise Amber Lee is the image of a loving and responsible young wife and mother. At the age of 21, she is living the best years of her life with her husband Nathan Lee and 2 lovely little boys, Noah and Adam. Denise spends all her time taking care of her family, while Nathan works tirelessly to support the family economy. He works 3 jobs at the same time just to make sure his wife and children do not lack anything. Their life is not rich, but it is always filled with laughter. Sincere love, silent sacrifice, and a small dream of a peaceful future have bound them together firmly. Both husband and wife are still very young, but they believe that as long as they have each other, all difficulties will pass. The Lee family has just moved to a new house located in a quiet residential area in Northport, Florida. This was a newly developed area. Many houses were still empty after the real estate crisis, but for them, it was a good start. That small house was not only a shelter, but also a place where they cherished the dream of building a decent and safe life for their 2 children. None of them could have imagined that this seemingly peaceful place would become the setting for a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. January 17, 2008 began like any other day in the simple but loving life of that small family. Denise woke up early, took care of her 2 sons, and cleaned the house as usual. She always tried to keep her home neat and cozy, despite the unnamed hardships of being a young, full-time mother. That morning was hotter than usual. At around 11 a.m., during lunch break, Nathan called home. The conversation only lasted a few minutes. They discussed daily matters, such as Denise turning off the air conditioner and opening the windows to save electricity, a small thing but reflecting the frugal lifestyle that the couple had become accustomed to. There was no sign of anything unusual. Denise was calm, still cheerful. It was a normal morning, seemingly peaceful, just like hundreds of days before. None of them expected that just a few hours later, everything would change completely. And from that moment, a terrifying chain of events would begin, bringing with it an indelible pain. At noon on January 17, 2008, everything was still peaceful in the Lee family's small house. Denise spent the morning taking care of her 2 sons, preparing lunch and cleaning as usual. Around 11 o'clock, Nathan called home during his break. The 2 talked for a few minutes. Denise said she had opened the window to save on electricity, a small detail but showing their frugal, simple living habits. There was nothing unusual in Denise's voice or behavior. She was still the gentle, careful wife who always took care of her family. Every sign showed that it was a normal day, with nothing foreshadowing the tragedy. But between that call and Nathan getting off work at 3 p.m., something happened. Something no one in the family expected, and no one had a chance to stop. When Nathan returned home, he knew right away that something was wrong. And then, things began to slip away from the routine their family had once maintained. The time between the afternoon phone call and Nathan's return home around 3 p.m. was the pivotal moment when everything changed forever. During those few hours, Denise Amber Lee, a young mother who was caring for her child in her own home, was approached by a strange man. There were no eyewitnesses to the incident, but the evidence later showed that Denise had been forced out of the house, either by force or under threat. The man forced Denise into his car, a blue Chevrolet Camaro. She was placed in the back seat, her hands restrained, her eyes covered. However, in her desperate situation, Denise remained remarkably alert. She discovered the phone her captor had left open and immediately called 911. It was her only chance to call for help. On the emergency call, Denise struggled to get every vital piece of information across. Her name, the color and make of the car, the area she was traveling in, and most importantly, that the person holding her was a complete stranger. She tried to keep her voice calm, pretending to be talking privately so as not to alert her captor. It was a breathtaking act of courage, both hopeful and desperate. The call lasted only a few minutes. During that time, a cacophony of sounds came through the phone. The sound of a car driving by, Denise's voice trying to answer, and finally the man's voice asking questions. When he realized Denise was on the phone, the call was cut off. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. At about the same time, a woman named Jane Kowalski was driving along US 41 when she stopped at a red light. Next to her was a blue car, and from it came a terrified scream. Surprised, Jane looked over and saw an arm waving wildly, trying to hit the car window as if to attract attention. She quickly called 911 and reported the situation as a suspected kidnapping in progress. However, like Denise's call, Jane's alarm was not handled promptly. The dispatcher received the call, but did not classify it as an emergency. By the time the suspect's car had swerved into another lane and disappeared, the only opportunity to intervene had passed. Any attempt to warn was too late. As soon as Nathan returned home and did not see Denise, he knew that this was not a normal absence. He did not hesitate to immediately call the police. At the same time, he contacted his father-in-law, Mr. Rick Goff, a veteran officer of the Charlotte County Police Department with more than 25 years of experience. Rick was expecting his daughter and son-in-law to have dinner at home, but instead of receiving a confirmation call, he received news that Denise had disappeared without a trace. With the intuition of a father and the expertise of a veteran police officer, he understood the importance of every first minute. Rick immediately alerted the entire system and called for support from his former colleagues. In a short time, the authorities were present at the Lee family's house. They checked the scene, talked to neighbors, and checked the surrounding roads. At the same time, around 6:30 p.m., a woman named Jane Kowalski was stopped at a red light when she heard a scream coming from the car next to her. She saw an arm pounding on the window, a haunting image. Jane immediately called 911 to report the incident, believing she had witnessed a kidnapping. However, because the call was routed between police precincts, that crucial information never reached the right place at the right time. The delay in response made the chance of saving Denise, albeit a slim one, more remote than ever. As the clues became clearer, the investigation team turned to determining the location and identity of the suspect. One of the most important clues was the emergency call that Denise made from the abductor's phone. Although the phone was prepaid and did not have a GPS device, the cell phone signals still gave the police some information about the neighborhood where the call was made. From the phone number data, the authorities quickly identified the owner as a man named Michael King, 36 years old, who lived not far from the Lee family's home. This name was not on the acquaintance list of Denise or Nathan. That made the suspicion even more serious. This could be a random kidnapping, and the perpetrator was a complete stranger. Immediately, a group of police were sent to search Michael King's private home. Here they discovered many unusual details. In a small room at the back of the house, police found a roll of duct tape with a long brown hair, similar to Denise's. The room was unfurnished and strangely empty, but it showed signs of recent use. There were also mud stains and the smell of gasoline, details that would later prove important in determining the final location of the crime. At the same time, at approximately 9:16 p.m., a patrol officer spotted a green Camaro that matched the description given by witness Jane Kowalski. The car was stopped. The driver was Michael King, and he was alone. Police asked King to get out of the car for inspection. They quickly noticed that his clothes were wet from the waist down. Inside the car, they found a mud-stained shovel, a gas can, and a cell phone with the battery removed. These items matched other witnesses' statements that Michael had stopped by the house to borrow similar items. King was arrested on the spot and taken to the police station for questioning. At this point, no one knew for sure what happened to Denise, but all signs pointed to the case entering a critical phase. The investigators knew that time was ticking away, and to find Denise, they needed to piece together the facts quickly, before it was too late. In the interrogation room, Michael King remained indifferent and uncooperative. When questioned about what had happened on January 17th, he offered an incredible story. He said he had also been kidnapped, that a strange man had forced both him and Denise into a car, then dropped him off in the middle of the road without explaining why. He also tried to make up a story about himself trying to call 911, but being unable to reach her. However, this story quickly fell apart when investigators presented a series of contradictory evidence. First, the time and place of King's appearance matched exactly with 911 calls from multiple independent witnesses, all without mentioning any third party. Then came the DNA testing. A sample found on the victim's body matched King's DNA, indicating that he had been in close contact with Denise. King's cell phone data also showed the movement of the report matched reports police received from residents throughout the afternoon and evening. One witness reported seeing a green Camaro, the type of car King owned, parked in front of her house in the late afternoon. Another described King stopping by to borrow a can of gas, a shovel, and a flashlight, saying her lawnmower was stuck in the mud. But the most telling thing was that the woman who was with her looked terrified and yelled for the police to be called. At the time, no one suspected it was Denise. When police searched the car, they found a touching and heartbreaking piece of evidence: a small heart-shaped ring on the back floor. It was the ring Nathan had given Denise on their first Valentine's Day, a gift she wore with her, never taking it off. Nathan knew Denise had been there just by looking at the ring, and if the ring had been left in the car, what had happened to her? Other details in the case file were also, the evidence was quickly building, from the mud on King's clothes to the fact that he had removed the battery from his phone, a deliberate act to avoid being located. Combined with inconsistent testimony, investigators were gradually building a portrait of someone who was not only lying, but also deliberately misleading investigators. By this time, although Denise's body had not been found, investigators were almost certain that a crime had been committed, and they needed to act quickly before the last traces disappeared over time. After the evidence was collected and the indictment was filed, Michael King was formally charged with 3 serious crimes: kidnapping, assault, and first-degree murder. His trial began in August 2009, nearly 2 years after Denise disappeared. For the Lee family, it was a long, painful journey, but one that could not be avoided. In court, King continued to maintain his innocence. His defense attorney argued that there were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and there were no video recordings or direct witnesses. However, the prosecution presented a solid body of evidence, from phone records, DNA samples, witness statements, to physical evidence found in the defendant's car and home. Each detail matched up, creating a unified picture of the crime. Particularly moving in court was the recording of Denise's 911 call. The courtroom fell silent as her frantic, courageous voice rang out in the final minutes of her life. It was living proof and the most powerful accusation. It took the jury just a few hours to reach its decision. Michael King was found guilty on all 3 counts. For the kidnapping, he was sentenced to life in prison. For the assault, he received an additional 30 years. And for the first-degree murder, he was sentenced to death. When the verdict was announced, the atmosphere in the courtroom became tense. Nathan Lee, her husband who had once believed in justice, just bowed his head silently. While the verdict could not bring Denise back, it was at least an affirmation. She had been heard, and the perpetrator had paid the price. However, Denise's journey to justice did not end with the trial. Her family had another goal: to change the system that had let her escape. Denise Amber Lee's family not only lost a daughter, a loving wife, a gentle mother, but also lost a beautiful future that they had built together. Denise passed away at the age of 21, an age when many people are just starting to write their life story. But for her, it all ended on a fateful afternoon, amid cries for help that no one heard in time. The case was not just a personal tragedy. it became a wake-up call for the entire United States about serious flaws in the emergency response system. A series of 9/11 calls were made that day, not only from Denise, but from reliable witnesses. But because of delays, misdirection, and lack of timely response, the only chance of survival was lost. Refusing to let his daughter's death be just a statistic, Mr. Rick Goff, Denise's father, stood up and fought tirelessly. He and his family lobbied, worked with lawmakers, and shared their grief in every forum possible. The result was the Denise Lee Act, passed by Florida just months after the case. It set standards for training, supervision, and evaluation of 911 operators, the people who are on the line, saving lives with just one phone call. To date, however, many states have yet to enforce it as a national standard. The Lee family continues their journey, not just to honor Denise, but to ensure that no one else has to endure the same pain. The message of Denise Lee's case is clear. Every second in an emergency can mean life or death, and sometimes it's the silence or delays in the system that keep a person from ever coming home.
What happened?
These people are trying to kill me.
A panicked cry for help rang out in the middle of the night through an emergency call that lasted more than 20 minutes. On the other end of the line was a young woman gasping for breath, her voice trembling, repeating the phrase over and over as she ran past the beach houses, knocking on doors in desperation. That was the last time anyone heard her voice. Shannan Gilbert, 23, from New Jersey, was a young, energetic, and ambitious person. On the night of May 1st, 2010, she went to Oak Beach, a secluded residential area on the coast of Long Island, to meet a client who had made an appointment. From the moment she entered that house, all traces of her gradually became vague and uneasy. No one could have expected that such a seemingly normal trip would open the door to a series of unsolved mysteries. And it was Shannan Gilbert's 911 call, in the dark, in a sea of fear and survival instinct, that became the starting point for an investigation that has shocked America. But what drove her to flee in panic? Who was she hiding from? And why did the clues she left behind lead police to a series of more chilling discoveries on the once peaceful and isolated Gilgo Beach? The story of Shannan Gilbert is more than a disappearance. It is a haunting reminder of the secrets that can lurk in even the safest of communities. On the night of April 30th to May 1st, 2010, Shannan Gilbert booked an appointment through an online advertisement with a client named Joseph Brewer, who lived in the Oak Beach, Long Island residential area. This is a secluded, gated coastal area populated primarily by retirees and private individuals. Shannan was accompanied by her chauffeur, Michael Pack, who often drove her to appointments and waited outside. At around 2 a.m., Shannan entered Brewer's home. At first, things seemed normal, but after a short time, the atmosphere in the house began to change. According to Brewer's testimony, Shannan became anxious and spoke incoherently, as if she was afraid of something unknown. He asked Michael Pack to take her away, but Shannan refused to leave the house, then suddenly ran from the scene. At 4 a.m., the Suffolk County 911 Dispatch Center received an unusually long call. More than 20 minutes from a young woman, her voice filled with panic and confusion. She kept saying that someone was trying to kill her, but she couldn't say clearly where she was. The whispers were interspersed with footsteps, the sound of the ocean breeze, and her rapid breathing. Shannan ran along the beach road, knocking on several doors. A couple said they heard knocking and screaming for help, but because it was still dark and they didn't know what was happening, they didn't answer. Another neighbor saw a girl running across the yard, but thought it was someone drunk or having personal problems. Michael Pack tried to find Shannan, driving around the area. He saw her briefly near the lawn, then she disappeared into the darkness. After she was last seen, Shannan walked across a patch of wasteland adjacent to the swamp and was never seen again. The 911 call ended in silence. No police or ambulances were dispatched immediately, due to the vague location and unclear nature of the call. The next morning, no one knew where Shannan was. The family called the driver and the passenger back, but received only disjointed, incoherent answers. No one expected that leaving a house that night would lead to a months-long search and eventually reveal a shocking secret about a series of other victims in this quiet coastal area. Soon after Shannan went missing, bystanders began reporting the incident to authorities. Michael Pack, who had driven her to Oak Beach, was the first to speak up, describing the unusual circumstances of the night and how he had been unable to find her after she had suddenly run away. Joseph Brewer, the homeowner, also reported that Shannan had left his residence in an unsteady and unexplained state. However, the initial efforts of the police to find Shannan Gilbert were not as urgent as expected. The reason was that many agencies believed that this was simply a runaway or a personal situation with no obvious signs of crime. Her family, especially her mother, Mari Gilbert, did not accept this passive approach. With a strong feeling that her daughter was in danger, she proactively contacted the press, convincing the police to expand the investigation and organize a search. The tireless efforts eventually paid off, but they opened a terrifying door. In December 2010, while patrolling the Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, a police officer stumbled upon a skeleton wrapped in a burlap sack. Before the victim could be identified, police expanded their search, and within days, 3 more bodies were discovered in a similar manner, also wrapped and hidden in bushes along the road. The victims were all young women who had previously advertised their services online and worked as freelancers. Their identities were quickly established: Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. The press dubbed them the Gilgo Four. The discovery of 4 bodies in quick succession in the same area, with nearly identical methods of concealment, completely changed the direction of the investigation. What had once been a personal disappearance had become a serious serial murder case, with national media attention. Police immediately cordoned off the area, deployed dogs, surveillance aircraft, and forensic teams to continue searching Gilgo Beach and surrounding wastelands. But as the volume of information grew, a terrifying truth began to emerge. This was no longer the story of a missing girl, but the beginning of a series of haunting, unsolved crimes that had lasted for years. While other victims were identified, the question of Shannan Gilbert remained unanswered. Where was she? Was she one of the victims of the same killer? Or was her case completely separate? All sorts of theories were raised, and the public began to closely follow every step of the investigation. After more than a year of being missing without a trace, in December 2011, searchers discovered Shannan Gilbert's remains in a dense swamp area, just a few hundred meters from where she was last seen. The surrounding landscape suggested that her body had been there for a long time, severely affected by environmental factors such as water, mud, and wild vegetation. The location of the body was scattered, with some of the bones no longer intact. Personal items such as clothing and a phone were also found nearby, allowing authorities to confirm her identity. However, there were no obvious signs of assault, struggle, or use of a weapon at the scene, which made the case even more complicated. The Suffolk County Medical Examiner's Office concluded that the cause of death was likely related to being trapped in a muddy environment and hypothermia. However, Shannan's family was not satisfied with that conclusion. They requested an independent autopsy from renowned forensic pathologist Michael Baden. In additional analysis, Baden found damage to the hyoid bone, a feature often associated with strangulation. While it cannot be conclusive, it is a strong indication that Shannan did not die naturally as initially believed. The question of what really happened to her continues to be a mystery that many people struggle with. When Shannan Gilbert went missing, investigators initially treated it as a typical missing person case. Her work as a lone wolf in the 911 call did not immediately indicate a crime. Police initially theorized that she may have gotten lost or been in a state of panic due to psychological or drug-induced reasons. However, the shocking discoveries made just a few months later forced investigators to change their approach. As more bodies of women were discovered along the Gilgo Beach Highway, a connection emerged. All had posted online to find clients, had gone missing under similar circumstances, and their bodies had been disposed of in similar ways, hidden in sacks and placed in close proximity to each other. The coincidence was no longer a coincidence, and police were forced to consider the theory of a serial killer operating for a long time without being detected. The scale of the case brought together multiple federal and state agencies. They began analyzing call records, tracking vehicles that had entered and exited the area, and checking records of individuals who had behaved suspiciously in the past. For years, the case seemed to be at a standstill, with no specific suspects emerging with enough evidence. However, a major breakthrough came in 2022 when new genetic analysis technology allowed for the testing of samples that had been stored for years. A hair found in a sack containing the body of a victim had previously been unusable due to the limitations of the technology at the time. With whole genome sequencing, the sample could now be traced with high accuracy. In parallel with the forensic process, the investigation team also used data analysis from cell towers, a technique that helped determine the area where the suspect's phone had been. Signals in the Gilgo Beach area around the time the victims went missing showed that a device had been repeatedly spotted around the scene. After combining information from subscriber data, suspicious calls, and vehicle descriptions, the police began to focus their attention on a man named Rex Heuermann. Heuermann was an architect with offices in Manhattan and a residence in Massapequa Park, just a few miles from the crime scene. In addition to his unassuming appearance, he had no criminal record and lived a quiet life with his family. What drew the police to him was a series of records showing that Heuermann's phone had been used to call several of the victims under false names while they were still alive. The calls were made from locations near his home or office. In July 2023, after months of close surveillance, the police decided to arrest Rex Heuermann. Search warrants were executed at both his residence and his workplace. They seized computers, hard drives, electronic devices, notes, and personal items. Some of the most notable evidence was hair samples, some of which matched the DNA found on the victims' bodies. Heuermann's arrest created a wave of intense media and public interest. He was quickly charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, including in the deaths of the Gilgo 4 victims: Melissa Barthelemy, Amber Costello, Megan Waterman, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Evidence included DNA, location data, online behavior, and witnesses who had seen him before the victims went missing. Although the investigation into Shannan Gilbert's death has not yet resulted in any direct charges against Heuermann, investigators continue to analyze the possibility of a connection. The panicked 911 call she made that night, which lasted more than 22 minutes, is still considered a key clue. Her words, the sounds around her, the voices of others, all were extracted, processed, and compared to determine whether a suspect was present in the situation. One point of contention is that Shannan's body was discovered not in the same area as the Gilgo 4, but near the house where she fled. This has led some experts to believe that she may have died in an accident while trying to escape something, rather than being directly murdered. However, the injuries to her body, particularly to her neck, along with the state of fear recorded in the call, continue to keep investigators from ruling out any theories. The Suffolk County prosecutor confirmed that the process of collecting and analyzing evidence is still ongoing and has not ruled out further charges if warranted. Police also continue to urge anyone with information about the night of the incident or other victims who have not yet been identified to contact them to assist in the investigation. The case of Shannan Gilbert, although it began with a seemingly isolated call, has led to the uncovering of a crime network that spans years. While no final conclusions have been reached for each part of this complex case, ongoing investigative efforts are gradually bringing the truth to light, in the hope of not only finding justice for the victims, but also restoring faith in justice for the survivors. After his arrest in July 2023, Rex Heuermann appeared in Suffolk County Court for preliminary hearings. He has not yet been formally tried by jury. Instead, the legal system is undergoing a series of pretrial hearings, where lawyers, prosecutors, and judges discuss the admissibility of evidence, the scope of the charges, and how future trials will be conducted. One of the most hotly debated issues is whether the cases should be tried together or separately for each victim. The prosecution argues that the similarities between the cases, the method of the crime, the victim population, and the physical evidence, warrant a consolidated prosecution. Heuermann's defense team, meanwhile, argued that a joint trial would make it difficult for the jury to be impartial to the specific circumstances. At the same time, the parties also face questions about the use of modern DNA testing techniques. The use of advanced genetic sequencing technology to analyze hairs collected at the scene is a complex legal issue. The defense argues that the process is not completely standardized and could lead to errors. The court is considering whether to allow this evidence to be presented to the jury. Although Heuermann is currently only charged in cases involving a group of confirmed victims, the name Shannan Gilbert has always been at the center of the debate. Her family, especially her late mother, Mari Gilbert, have been speaking out for years to expand the investigation and include Shannan's death in the same prosecution. However, Shannan's case has so far not been confirmed to have any direct legal connection to Heuermann. The public has been closely following every move in court, and the press has been covering every hearing, although it has not been recorded live due to New York State regulations. Many locals, especially those on Long Island, are hopeful that the upcoming trial will not only shed light on the truth about the identified victims, but also clarify the fate of Shannan, who inadvertently sparked the entire investigation with her own cry for help. An official date for the trial has not yet been announced, but all signs point to the case being one of the most riveting legal events in the country in recent years. When the courtroom doors open, questions that have lingered for more than a decade may be answered. Shannan Gilbert left home one night like any other, never to return. Her late-night call for help was not only a desperate last words, but also a catalyst that opened a dark mystery that had been buried under the sands of Long Island. What seemed like an isolated disappearance gradually revealed a series of crimes that spanned years, with nameless victims and unspoken pain. Although many clues have been exposed, although Rex Heuermann has been arrested and is facing justice, the biggest question still has no definitive answer. Who really made Shannan Gilbert forever unable to return? The case not only shows the harshness of a society in which many people are easily forgotten because of their living conditions or occupations, it also challenges how the legal system responds to the initial weak calls for help. If it had acted faster, what could have been different? Amidst all the facts, convictions, and investigations, there remains a void called truth, and that makes us wonder, how many other calls like Shannan's are still being left unanswered? What do you think? Is justice enough?
Since Vanessa was tragically taken from us, not a day goes by that we don't reflect on the enormity of our loss.
That was the choked voice of the uncle, representing the victim's family, when talking about the unjust death of Vanessa Marcotte, a young, talented, and ambitious girl, but forever gone after a seemingly normal afternoon like any other. On a summer afternoon in 2016, in the small town of Princeton, a peaceful place that had not had a murder for decades, people were shocked to hear about the disappearance of a local girl. No one could have expected that just a few hours later, the entire community would be shocked by a horrific discovery in the sparse woods. And from there, a persistent investigation began, searching for traces of the seemingly invisible culprit. Vanessa Marcotte, 27 years old, Google employee, only daughter of a single mother, disappeared without a trace after a familiar jog. But the disappearance quickly became one of the most shocking murders in America at that time. If you are interested in real, dramatic, and haunting cases like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. On Sunday afternoon, August 7th, 2016, Vanessa Marcotte left her mother's house in Princeton around 1 p.m. to go for a walk, a familiar activity every time she had the chance to go back to her hometown. That day's route was a quiet forest path, not too far from home, and with few people passing by. But no one expected that it would be the last time anyone saw her alive. A witness said that they saw Vanessa standing in front of a nearby convenience store, apparently looking for water. She was still wearing her sportswear, headphones around her neck, and her phone in her hand, the appearance of someone who was just going for a short walk. However, just a few minutes later, she completely disappeared from everyone's sight. At around 2:11 p.m., Vanessa's phone suddenly lost signal. This is considered the last time she had contact with the outside world. All calls from relatives after that fell into silence. There were no cries for help, no unusual sounds. The woods were almost deserted. However, another witness recalled seeing a dark SUV parked on the side of the road, the hood open. Next to the car was a man on his phone. About an hour later, the car was still there, but the man was gone. No one heard any signs of anything unusual. No apparent struggle, no screaming, no first-hand witnesses. It was the silence that made the incident all the more puzzling. Vanessa was a careful woman, always reporting her schedule when she left the house. She had no unexpected appointments, and she had never complained about anything worrying. When it started to get dark and her daughter still hadn't returned to catch the bus back to New York, Vanessa's mother, Rosanna, immediately felt uneasy. Her mother's instincts urged her to call the police that same evening. A search was launched involving police, dogs, and local residents. The search lasted for hours, and as night fell, there was still no trace of Vanessa. What happened in the short time between her leaving the convenience store and her phone losing signal was still a mystery. But then the pieces began to fall into place, the beginning of a journey to find the truth that shocked the entire community. As the afternoon wore on and Vanessa's daughter still hadn't returned, Rosanna, Vanessa's mother, began to feel uneasy. At first, it was just quiet worry. Maybe her daughter was jogging, lost, or her phone had run out of battery. But as time passed without any text messages or calls, the mother's intuition began to tell her that something was wrong. At around 5 p.m., she took the initiative to call the local police, expressing her concern that her daughter had left home at noon but hadn't returned. It was an instinctive decision, and it was thanks to that action that the first door of the investigation was opened. Immediately after receiving the information, the authorities mobilized staff, dividing into many groups to search around the area where Vanessa might have passed. It was still light that day. The weather was favorable for checking the trails in the forest. At about 8:20 p.m., one of the teams with the dogs found suspicious tracks in a dense brush area less than a mile from the main road. The dog led the searchers straight to a hidden spot with no clear path. It seemed that no one had ever been there before. The flashlight flickered between the dense foliage, then stopped at a motionless object lying in the short grass. The searchers immediately confirmed that it was a female body. Although there was no official identity, the shape, clothing, and location of the discovery made everyone understand that the person they had been looking for all afternoon was Vanessa. The initial state of the scene surprised the investigators. The victim's body was about 60 meters from the main road, in an area with no houses nearby. The clothes were missing, and a pair of sneakers were lying not far away, showing signs of being burned. Under the dim light, there were light burn marks on the victim's hands and feet, a sign that someone might have deliberately destroyed the evidence. Vanessa's phone and headphones were also missing from the scene. This made the investigation team suspect that they had been taken away, possibly to conceal information related to the killer. Every inch of the surrounding land was meticulously searched, but the initial results did not reveal any clear clues. The case was immediately upgraded to a major investigation. The first questions began to arise. Who could have committed the crime in such a quiet area? And why did Vanessa choose the place she knew as a scene? Everything was still a mystery at that time. Immediately after the scene was sealed off, the forensic team and investigators quickly got to work. The space around the forest, which was once quiet, became cold and tense. Every trace, no matter how small, was carefully recorded, because any detail could be the key to clarifying the case. At the location of the body, apart from a scorched shoe lying nearby, no phone or personal device was found. In particular, there were traces of grass being crushed and scratched on the ground, suggesting a struggle. There were no clear footprints due to the dry soil and thick grass, but some small pieces of half-burnt paper and faint traces of gasoline were discovered around the area. The autopsy results showed that the victim died from strangulation. There were many small wounds on the body, mostly concentrated on the hands, indicating that she had fiercely resisted. Most importantly, there were strange skin cells left under the victim's fingernails, the first biological evidence that led to the suspect. The time of death was estimated to be around early afternoon, close to the time Vanessa's phone was turned off. Another unusual detail that caught the investigators' attention: minor burns on the victim's hands and face, which were not fatal but showed that someone had intentionally set the fire after the victim had died. From there, the hypothesis was put forward. The killer may have returned to the scene to cover up the traces. This behavior opened up a new direction for the investigation, searching for people who had appeared around the area during that sensitive time frame. As soon as the coroner concluded that the victim had died from strangulation and that there were signs of post-mortem burning, the investigation entered a critical phase. The investigation team immediately expanded the scope, checking the entire route Vanessa might have traveled that fateful afternoon. Although Princeton is a small, quiet town with few camera systems, the police still collected every possible data, from traffic images to the accounts of residents. One particular clue quickly emerged. A witness recalled seeing a dark-colored SUV parked on the side of the road, near the entrance to the woods, the hood open, next to a man who appeared to be on the phone. About an hour later, the car was still there, but the man was gone. The witness description was athletic build, short hair, Hispanic. From that detail, the police began to narrow down all the suitable SUV owners in the vicinity, especially those who were in Princeton between noon and about 3 p.m. On the initial list, the name Angelo Cullen Ortiz quickly became a prominent subject, residing in Worcester, not far from the scene, working for a private delivery company, frequenting the area. When first summoned, Angelo was unpredictably calm. He claimed that he did not know Vanessa and did not remember his schedule that day. However, when questioned more closely, his answers began to become inconsistent. At times, he said he had been home all day. At other times, he said he had driven out but didn't remember where. Angelo's gestures gradually became awkward, his eyes averted, his voice began to falter, all of which made the investigators wary. The police decided to request a warrant to take a DNA sample from the suspect to compare with biological traces found under the victim's fingernails. Angelo initially signed the consent form, but his legal team later argued that his client did not fully understand his rights because of the language barrier, leading to a lengthy legal battle. Meanwhile, an independent piece of evidence was discovered: a $5 gas bill from a nearby gas station, dated 2:35 p.m., the time after Vanessa's phone went dead. This reinforced the theory that the killer had returned to the scene to destroy evidence. Then came the decisive moment. The forensic results showed that the DNA under Vanessa's fingernails was a 100% match to Angelo Colon Ortiz's. It was irrefutable evidence. The police immediately approached Angelo again, but this time he was no longer calm. When asked about the DNA, Angelo remained silent, bowed his head, and did not answer any questions, a silence that was heavy and suspicious. No confession was uttered, but the truth was clear. On April 15, 2017, Angelo Colon Ortiz was formally arrested on charges of first-degree murder and robbery. The indictment was promptly filed, with more than 200 pages of documents compiling a comprehensive compilation of physical evidence, witness testimony, and travel records. Although the attorneys sought to disprove the DNA sample by questioning the sampling procedure, the judge ultimately upheld the legality of the evidence. The case moved to trial, attracting national attention and media attention. For the people of Princeton, the shock was greater than the case itself. The suspect was someone who had been quietly appearing in town, a delivery man with no criminal record, no attention. And it was this ordinary that hid the most dangerous person. The investigation was closed after nearly a year, but the echoes and the question why still could not be fully answered. It's not just a case, but a journey to find justice for an innocent girl, and a warning about the darkness that can exist even in the middle of the day. After Angelo Colon Ortiz was indicted, the case entered the pretrial phase. Over the years, the case file was carefully reviewed, and each piece of evidence was reevaluated to ensure its rigor. A series of preliminary hearings were held, in which the legal issue of taking a DNA sample from the suspect was a point of contention. The defense argued that Colon Ortiz did not understand his rights when he signed the consent form because he did not speak English fluently. However, the prosecutor argued that the entire procedure was carried out properly with the assistance of an interpreter. Even though he did not speak the same dialect as the suspect, the judge ultimately decided to reject the request to exclude the evidence, upholding the legal value of the DNA test results. In the context of the case about to be brought to a public trial, the two sides negotiated a plea agreement. The victim's family, after years of waiting, chose the less painful path, agreeing to the prosecutor's request to avoid a lengthy trial with traumatic details. In October 2022, Angelo Colon Ortiz officially pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and robbery. In court, he did not say much, only bowing his head when the verdict was announced. The sentence was announced: 20 years in prison for robbery, followed by life with a minimum of 25 years without parole for murder, a total of at least 45 years in prison. Before the end of the courtroom, Vanessa's family was invited to speak. Her mother, Rosanna, choked up as she said that her life had completely changed since losing her daughter. "I will never have the chance to see my daughter in a wedding dress, never be the grandmother I dreamed of being," she said. Those words brought tears to many people in the courtroom. After the trial, the public reaction was largely sympathetic. Many felt relieved that justice had finally been served, even though it had taken 6 years. Thousands of shares on social media expressed their condolences for Vanessa, a talented young person who had passed away too soon. The trial ended, the verdict was issued, but the echoes of the story still linger. Not only is it a family's pain, the case is also a strong reminder that safety should never be taken for granted, even in the most seemingly peaceful places. The Marcotte family's lives have been forever changed since that fateful afternoon. Vanessa's death was not only an immeasurable loss for a mother, but also a lingering wound in the hearts of friends, colleagues, and even strangers who only knew her from the evening news. A bright future was taken away in an instant, leaving a void that nothing could fill. This case is not simply a personal tragedy, but also a wake-up call for all of us, that the line between safe and dangerous is sometimes just a few steps away. In a seemingly peaceful world, evil can still hide under the most ordinary shell, and it is vigilance and proactive self-protection that is the first shield each person can create for themselves. Justice has come, albeit late. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the investigation force and the family's perseverance, the truth has been brought to light. But no matter how harshly the perpetrator is punished, the wounds in the hearts of those left behind are still something that no court can heal. In an increasingly complex society where evil can hide behind any face, the question is, are we sober enough to recognize the danger signals before it's too late? What do you think about this heartbreaking case? If you were a relative in that situation, how would you choose to face it? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel to continue the journey of discovering the stories behind the light of justice.